Hey everyone, welcome to another video with us, Outdoor Intrigue. Today we're talking to you about the Terra Nova Southern Cross 2 4-season 2-person tent. It's a tent that we've had for nearly 4 years now. We've used it in all sorts of weather conditions, everything from sunny summer days to full snow, top of the mountain, getting hammered by gale force winds, and lots of wet conditions in between. So it felt like a good time to give you a little bit of insight into what we thought about this tent and how it's held up for us over those years of use. To start off with, this is a tent that, as it says in the name, 4-season, 2-person. It really does have the ability to last in any weather conditions. So it does have a little bit of weight to it. It comes in at 2.29 kilograms is the listed packed weight, or 2.1 kilograms is Terra Nova's listed minimum weight. I find that to ring pretty true. The way I've got it set up now, which is fairly lean, but definitely for all weathers, is about 2.2 kilograms. Which is, I think, not super heavy for a 4-season tent, but definitely not also the absolute lightest thing out there. But it's a pretty good place given the space you get. We'll get on to more of that though. Let's start with the statistics and give you a few of the insights into the stats of this tent. So the tent itself, the RRP listed by Terra Nova is £770. You definitely don't need to pay that for it. You can pick it up online for around £500 to £550. There are plenty of retailers selling it brand new at that price point. So just have a little look around. The tent is fully freestanding, so the way that the pole setup works, you can completely pitch the tent without actually having to peg it out at all. Obviously that gives you a lot of versatility when you're looking at the kind of ground that you can pitch the tent on. If you're on rocky ground where you can't really get pegs in, you can still get the tent up and use rocks or other items to potentially tie the tent down, or even sleep in it and just use your own body weight to keep it where it is. It also means that if you pitch the tent on softer ground and you realize it's in the wrong spot, you can pick the whole thing up and move it quite easily. It gives you a lot of options having that freestanding aspect to it, which is a real benefit. It has 2 vestibules, 2 entry points, so 1 door on either side, which you can get in and out of, and each side has a vestibule of equal size. So for 2 people, it generally makes it quite nice and accessible. You don't have to climb over each other. You can get in and out on either side of the tent. The tent is all as one pitch, so that means that your fly sheet on the outer here goes up with the inner attached to it on the inside, so you can put it up in bad weather. The inner won't get wet. You can pitch it, climb in, and you can either then unclip the inner and make a little bit more room if you want to do stuff inside, or you've just got the inner there ready to go. The outer fly sheet is 5,000 millimeters hydrostatic head. The ground sheet is 10,000 millimeters hydrostatic head. And it is all seam sealed and taped, which all of that means is it's very waterproof. We've never had a problem, even in heavy downpours, with it leaking. So it really does hold up to really consistent downpours and very wet weather. So there's no issues on that front. It has 4 guy lines traditionally. So that means there's 1 short one on either end where you've got these venting points, and 1 on either door side. I've added an additional guy line on each side. I'll talk about that more. But it normally comes with 4, and it comes with anodized aluminium pegs. I've used aftermarket pegs because, like with most tents, the ones they come with aren't as good as the ones that you can get aftermarket, so just be aware of that. Aside from that, it's a really easy tent to pitch. It goes up in about 5 minutes. You can pitch it on your own, or if there are 2 of you, which there are likely to be, it's dead easy, very quick. We've put it up in all sorts of weather conditions. It's one of those tents that even in horrible blustery wind-blown conditions, it really isn't too bad to pitch. And once you've got it up, it's a nice safe place to jump in and shelter. So now that we've talked about some of the stats, the cost, the weight, let's jump into what really I feel are the key positive points about this tent, the Terra Nova Southern Cross 2. Okay, so let's talk about the positives with this tent. Why should you consider it as an option? Well, first off, it is really a pretty comfortable place to spend quite a bit of time, even for 2 people. Now that's really important when you're likely to be waiting out bad weather, or in the winter when you've not got much light and you're spending a lot of time in the tent. This is largely due to the fact that you've got those 2 vestibules, 1 on either side, and 2 entrances, 1 on either side. So when you're 2 people in the tent, you don't have to climb over each other. You've both got your own storage side for all your gear and your wet boots and everything else. You've also got room to cook in either of the vestibules should you want to. Obviously make sure you've got adequate ventilation when you're doing that, but you've got the room for that, which is really important. So that really helps. The other thing that is really important on this tent is that it is pretty light for the amount of weatherproofing you get. So the weight point that it's at is certainly not the lightest tent on the market, but when you look at true four-season tents that can take a battering and you don't have to worry about your pitch location, you can put it up on the side of a mountain, you can be way above tree lines for people who have to worry about that in America, and you don't have to worry because you know that you're going to be secure and it's going to be able to hold up to all of those bits of weather. That really, for that weight, it's pretty good, I'd say. There's not a lot of tents that beat it overall, certainly when you take into account the size and the livability. The other things that you should really like about this tent, and probably the biggest thing, is that weather resistance that I've alluded to. It can survive pretty much, I would say, most weather conditions you could chuck at it, which you'd expect from a four-season tent. And I would say it's a true mountain four-season tent. We've had this tent pitched up over 1,000 meters, getting hammered by 60-mile-an-hour plus winds, had it with heavy snow loading, had it with freezing, completely solid with rainfall, been in it for maybe 12, 13 hours one time in Neudark with rain consistently falling on us in winter, and nothing inside, completely dry and fine. So you can really trust it, and I think that is hugely important when you've got a four-season tent, that you know that you can put it up, climb inside and feel like you can be safe. And that's really what you're paying for here. The materials are really nice and strong. The outer is well constructed. The poles have a really good design. It's a pretty unique design. There's not a lot of tents shaped exactly like this, but it certainly has the ability to hold up to the weather as you'd expect a four-season tent to do, which is important. The other thing that's pretty great about this tent is the ability to vent it is pretty good. At least in my experience with it, over all the years we've used it, ventilation is pretty good, and that means that you don't have a huge problem with condensation. Now that is one of those things that with any tent you need to realise you're going to get condensation in certain weather conditions, particularly when it's still and damp. The tent is going to get saturated, but I don't think that this tent suffers any more than most of the other tents that I've experienced, really. And in many instances I've found that with even just a little bit of airflow, it is pretty good with condensation. And where you do have condensation, generally speaking, the outer is far enough away from you on the inner that you don't get it all over you, so it's not too much of a problem with it being a dual skin tent, so obviously the outer and the inner being separated by a reasonable gap. You've got the main ventilation points being one vent on either side that has a guy line opening. You can choose how much you have them open, and then you can control the amount of ventilation that way. You've also got the main doors on the side where you can zip them open as much as you like. And the doors do have a clip on the bottom which allows you to create a little canopy with a trekking pole if you want to. Obviously you need decent weather conditions to do that, otherwise it's just going to blow open. But you can do that. You can actually open the door, put a pole in place and create a little bit of an extra canopy as well. So yeah. So I think those are some of the main positive points, and they're pretty big ones. You know, it doesn't weigh too much for what it's capable of. It's pretty livable space-wise, which is great. It's really weather resistant, which you want. Obviously, if you're buying a four-season tent, that's probably the main reason you're buying it. So those things are real positives. Now that we've covered those, let's jump into what's not so good and the things you need to watch out with this tent. So what are the bad points with this tent? What are the things you should watch out for and consider? Well, first of all, these sides are like sails. So when you pitch it, you really need to think about trying to put either end of the tent directly into the wind direction if possible. Now that's obviously frustrating because, as we know, sometimes you'll pitch a tent and the wind will change direction. So you can't always nail that anyway. I wish that with these side panels they'd put an extra guy point potentially directly onto the sides so that in strong wind conditions you could then peg those out. Because what happens is when it's side on, you aren't necessarily going to get the tent collapsing in on you completely. You will get some movement, obviously, because they are like big side panels like a sail. But what you will get is more wind noise, particularly if the wind catches kind of the bottom edge, and you'll get a little bit of that whipping around. You can combat that to a degree with getting a good taut pitch, and I've added an extra guy line onto the tent on either side, so you can kind of combat that a little bit. But I think it is a little bit of a flaw. It is part of the design, essentially, for what they've gone for here with these big side panels, but you just need to be aware of it, and it can sometimes be slightly frustrating. The other thing, and probably one of the main downsides to this tent, probably the biggest downside, is the inner. Now, the tent itself creates quite a decent sized footprint. With this outer, when you open it up and you go to get inside, you realise you've got a really nice big waterproof space in there. But the inner takes up such a small amount of that. It's only enough room for 2 adult-sized inflatable sleeping mats side by side and basically nothing more. You've almost got more rooms in the vestibules than you do in the inner itself, which is kind of crazy. You would have thought they'd make it just a little bit more room. And aside from the room itself, it doesn't have enough points where it attaches to the outer and in a taut enough way. It's just got a few attachment points, so it sags pretty heavily. So when you're lying down, you'll sometimes find that the inner is actually sagged in and touching you on the face, or in many instances, it's just kind of got no structure to it, which feels a bit strange, and I feel like they really could have done a better job with it. The inner also lacks in finishing quality. The outer of the tent and the construction is brilliant. I've not had to make any repairs to it. It's always held up despite being used for many years, for many nights of camping in many different conditions. Whereas the inner, I've had to have repaired once by Terra Nova and once I've repaired myself, which is a bit frustrating. It's got I think the main failure points is where it attaches on each corner to the outer itself, and it just seems to rip away at the seam. So yeah, that's something to watch out for, and obviously a bit annoying when you're paying quite a bit of money for a tent. So yeah, those are things to be aware of. Now, onto the experience I had with Terra Nova when I sent the inner in for a bit of a repair, which I would say was less than ideal. They weren't that easy to deal with over the phone, not the worst, but certainly not the best. And once I did send it in, I got no updates, no responses, nothing. Eventually I called them up asking what had happened. They said, oh, we already sent it back quite a while ago. And it turned out that they had an address on that was slightly wrong. They'd sent it to someone down the road from me, and it was wrapped up in basically a bin bag. The packaging was terrible. Overall, it was just a bit of an experience that you wouldn't want when you're dealing with what I feel like should be a premium brand. And they, you know, they're a small company, but they should rely on their name and hopefully back up the service that you expect. So yeah, it's frustrating, and I think they could have done a lot better with that. But that was years ago, so hopefully it's improved now. And certainly it was only one experience, so it might not be reflective of what you get in general from them. Those really are the main downsides to the tent. I'd say there's not a huge amount otherwise that is a downside to it. I mean, I've said the weight is a positive. I could also say the weight is a negative. Personally, I think you should really consider the weight of a tent when you're buying it, and I would always try and go for something as light as possible. But then saying that, to get something 4-season, there aren't so many options out there, so you've got to juggle that one. Conclusions on the Terra Nova Southern Cross 2. What do we think about it overall? After all these years of use and all these nights spent in it, often hiding from Scottish rain, what do we think? Well, I think overall we think it's a really good tent. We both enjoyed using it many times. It's easy to pitch, it's got lots of room, and it really does protect you from the weather, and you feel safe when you're inside it, which has a lot of value to it. So I think we would definitely recommend it to people looking for a 4-season, 2-person option. I think if you take into account the small negatives, you've still got a tent that's a real winner. And with the price being, in all reality, around the £500 mark, I think it really is worth that. If you're going to look at the RRP, I think it starts to be a little bit more silly, potentially, but hopefully you won't pay that. Now, I'd say that if you're going to check this tent out, there are a couple of other options on the market that are worth taking a look at too. Namely, the MSR Access 2 is a great 2-person, 4-season tent. You could also look at the Terra Nova Voyager, which is a great 2-person, 4-season tent, or the Voyager Ultralight, which I personally have. They don't make it anymore, but you can still often pick it up online, and it is a lightweight version of the Voyager, which again is a 4-season, 2-person tent. There are some other options out there, slightly more niche, some of them, but certainly those are some of the ones that come to mind as a comparative to this. But overall, like I say, we'd recommend it. I think it's a great place to spend time. I don't think it will let you down. I think you can trust in it. I think it gives you good value for money, and it's well made. So overall, yep, we recommend the Terra Nova Southern Cross 2. It gets a thumbs up from us, definitely from Maggie's behind the camera as well, I think. All good. Hopefully you guys have found this video useful. I meant to do this video quite a while ago, probably years ago, but it just means we've had even more experience using it, so no problem on that front. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. If you've got any questions on the tent at all or anything, then just leave that down in the comments and we'll always get back to you as soon as we can. And check us out on Instagram at Outdoor Intrigue. Otherwise, happy trails, and hope you guys are all enjoying the life that you live in. And we'll see you next time. Take care.